Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, episode 80, Intercourse and Pain. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode on Ladies Talking Love. And today we are going to be talking all about painful intercourse. This is such an interesting topic because for most of us as women, we grew up expecting pain with intercourse. Most of us heard the first time you have sex, and when people said sex, they meant intercourse, it will be painful. This sets so many women up to have awful sex and to not recognize that painful intercourse is not normal. It may be common, especially because of this myth and this idea that most of us get taught that intercourse is going to be painful the first time, but it's not normal. Intercourse should not be painful. And if it is, that means that there's something else going on that we need to take care of, whether that be pelvic floor PT or going to see our doctor or midwife, or as today we are going to talk about an approach with Jess Sietz where she experienced painful intercourse for years in her marriage. And as a physical therapist, she went in and she figured out what she needed to overcome this because it wasn't just the physical side. It wasn't just the mental therapy side. She needed an approach that covered it all. And that's what she's going to talk with you about today. Jess Sietz is a trauma-informed pelvic floor occupational therapist and founder of Pain-Free Intimacy, where she works as a vaginismus recovery coach to help women from around the world break free of the pain and frustration of vaginismus to enjoy intimacy the way it was intended. She has a background in nervous system regulation and chronic pain management and uses this to offer a unique approach to vaginismus recovery. Jess was inspired to help others after having healed from a long journey of vaginismus herself, a journey full of setbacks, poor advice, loneliness, and inconsistent progress. Wanting to help other women see the progress they're desiring with genuine support and care, she developed a comprehensive vaginismus program that has helped dozens of women turn pain into pleasure. Before jumping in, whether you're a longtime listener or you're new to the podcast, I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for working to make women's sexuality a topic that isn't taboo, something we can talk about and feel comfortable talking about, something that is crucial for ourselves and for future generations to make the world a better place for women's sexuality. If this podcast has been helpful for you, would you do me a favor? Would you just hop on and leave a review? It helps other people find the podcast, helps them know what we're all about. And I love seeing your reviews to know the wins you're experiencing and what this community has been able to do for you. But without further ado, let's talk love. I'm so excited to welcome Jess Sietz onto Ladies Talking Love today. Thanks so much for joining me, Jess.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
This is such an important topic, and I'm sure you feel the same way. That's why you do what you do, Jess. But just to shout it from the housetops, sex should not be painful. Intercourse should not be painful. So I'd love to just have you start off by telling us a little bit of your story.
I'm an occupational therapist is my background, but before I even graduated with my degree in occupational therapy, my husband and I got married and found out on our wedding night that sex was not what we thought it would be. I probably could have guessed because before that, tampons and speculums and stuff had always been a little bit of a struggle for me. I mean, I could do them, but it wasn't great. I just, to be honest, kind of thought that once we got married, the penis would kind of fix everything and I'd be all ready to go. But yeah, that was not the case. And so our wedding night, we had fun, but it was not how I thought. Like, it just wasn't really possible. It was really painful. It was really frustrating. And so the honeymoon things kind of continued. And we went on our honeymoon to southern Turkey, which is gorgeous. Definitely recommend, like the little Mediterranean coast there. But I remember getting Skype credits to put on my phone, and I called my gynecologist and was like, excuse me, can you tell me how is this supposed to work? And she's like, oh yeah, you just need to, relax, use some lube, drink some wine, you'll be okay. Well, fast forward 4 years later, we're still not really okay. I still haven't
Yeah.
figured it out. Things are still incredibly painful and difficult. We're able to kind of get him in, but it's not anything fantastic. It hurts a
Yeah.
lot. And so we kind of just resorted to doing other things with those who have vaginismus are really good at doing other things. But I finally, realized this can't be normal. This cannot be that type of pain that I heard about. It should not last as long.
Yeah.
So I finally had a gynecologist honestly listen to me enough to kind of mumble the word vaginismus, which is like, oh, okay, there's a diagnosis here. This is something. You feel a little bit of hope when you're given a diagnosis. And so I was like, great, fix me. Well, then I got kind of referred out to pelvic floor therapy, where I spent the next 4 years going through dilators and stretches and exercises and breathing. And I actually got through all the dilators twice, but then couldn't really transition to my husband, still incredibly painful and frustrating. Then we kind of decided it was quote unquote all in my head. So then I went to see sex therapists and counselors and couples counselors, got told a lot of things I just didn't really agree with. I had therapists tell me I should watch porn to learn how to do this. I had others tell me maybe I just wasn't interested in my husband and I wasn't attracted to him, and had someone blame my husband that it was his fault that I was this way, and just kind of kept spinning my wheels, getting the ring around, and just wasn't really getting anywhere. So
Yeah.
after 8 years, I was not in a great place. I was bitter, sad, depressed, frustrated. I got to the point where I didn't want to do any intimacy at all,
Yeah.
because all intimacy just felt like, sometimes I'd say, like consolation prize sex. And it just reminded me of how much I was lacking and how worthless I was in the bedroom, to be honest. And my husband is the sweetest man in the world. He never communicated this. He was always very supportive, helpful, never pushed me, pressured me. I did a lot of this to myself. And so we were just in not a good place. Our marriage was really hurting, and I was pushing him away in anger, basically, to protect him from being married to someone who couldn't have sex. Thankfully, though, at the time, I was working as an occupational therapist at that point, with patients with chronic pain, using a nervous system based approach to kind of help manage chronic pain symptoms. So I thought, okay, maybe vaginismus isn't all in my vagina. Maybe it's not all in my head. Maybe it is kind of in this space in between. Maybe I need to do a better job at supporting all of these factors that come to play. And maybe this is more of a systems approach that I need to take. So took a step back, like I would for any of my clients at the time. I created my own little treatment plan, had my own goals, broke down the processes, the steps that need to get there. And after implementing that for about 4-ish months, we were able to finally transition to pain-free penetrative sex, which was shocking for both of us. And we kind of
And
thought it was
from
a fluke.
8 years to
8 years.
4 months.
I know. I know. So we did. We thought it was kind of a fluke, but yeah, now it's been 5 years, no pain. I love this. I don't use dilators anymore. I initiate. I mean, there was a point in this journey where I was like, I could go the rest of my life and never have sex again and be totally happy. And now it grieves me to think I ever thought that. And so it's so freeing. It's so joyous to be able to be past the pain, but also to be past kind of that emotional drama that's been associated with intimacy. And now I'm grateful I get to help women all over the world get past vaginismus and painful sex to enjoy intimacy the way God designed it to be. So
I love your story so much because it is so sad. I think a lot of women get to this point of like, I would be happy to never have intercourse again, to never do anything sexual again. And it's so sad because this can be such a beautiful binding part of our marriage. And like you said, like the way God intended it to be is to bind us and to help us increase our love and our intimacy. And I would love for you to first off just define vaginismus for us, for those listening who are like, okay, you mentioned this word. What does this mean?
vaginismus is when your pelvic floor muscles or your vaginal wall muscles involuntarily contract upon penetration. Now, there's different types of vaginismus. There's secondary and primary. And primary is kind of, you've had it your whole life. Secondary is it happens after an you've been able to have penetration before, and then all of a sudden now you can't. And so there's different types and levels within that, but basically it's your vaginal opening, your vaginal wall muscles just basically close off and say, no, thank you. This can result in the classic symptom of the wall. A lot of people say it feels like there's a wall there, hitting a wall. That can happen either at the very entrance. It can happen midway through your vaginal canal, or it can happen deeper. And then a lot of people do experience burning sensation with this. And that's just a burning or stinging sensation. So it's painful, it's impossible for many, and it's just incredibly frustrating because it's outside your control. It's all happening involuntarily. And that's where the struggle is.
So frustrating. And for people who this has been kind of their story forever, that can happen with like inserting tampons or speculums you mentioned. So all of those are kind of signs. What are some of the things that could lead to a secondary vaginismus where this isn't how it's always been? You've been able to have intercourse and then suddenly you're struggling.
Different for everyone. So for some, it could be the wedding night. You might be able to insert tampons. You might have been able to do speculums or fingers before that. And then your anticipation of pain happening on the wedding night, your sexual experience, but for some, that can lead to the tightening, the clenching, the fear kind of response that's happening involuntarily. Again, it's all involuntary. And so that would technically be a secondary vaginismus because you've been able to insert things previously. For others, it can be childbirth is one where you vaginally delivered, or even some have had a C-section. And then after that, the body decides it wants to protect itself from the penis coming in because it feels like it still needs to protect itself from the bearing child, or even just holding a child in the uterus. And then for others, it can be things like bacterial vaginosis or UTI, or just things down there that have caused a little bit of a mini kind of trauma response that your body feels like, no, I don't want that to come in. I need protection. And then it just starts the cycle, and that cycle can last months, years, decades. I've had one client I've worked with who's had this for 25 years and not been able to have sex. So it can last.
And can you explain the cycle a little more? You kind of mentioned it. So it starts with some type of trauma, or just it's been happening your whole life. And then what's the cycle look like?
Usually there's, again, involuntary. Our conscious brain isn't necessarily going through all this, but your body has some kind of perceived tension. Like something comes inside my vagina, there's tension. It might hurt. It's not supposed to be there. And so to brace for impact, your pelvic floor muscles close, they constrict off to try and keep out whatever's coming in. And then what happens is when there is that insertion, you experience the wall sensation, but also with that, usually there's pain because when you push up against something that's trying to close off, those muscles are already kind of activated. And then when you hit them, it just causes more pain. So you do get a confirmed pain, which your body then says, see, I told you if you did this, it was going to hurt. And then we go back up into, okay, so last time I did that, it hurt. The body braces for impact, confirmation of that actually hurting. And then we just start that downward spiral to where we honestly start building neural pathways between the brain and the body that this is going to lead to pain every time, pretty much.
So your story is just so inspiring. I'm so excited to hear more. But for 8 years, you struggled with this and you tried pelvic floor physical therapy finally after 4 years, right? Someone finally told you to check that out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, it must be in my head. So you went to do therapy and things. So what did you discover in that time period then? You talked about you were working at a tell me the word you used again.
Yeah, I was doing like pain science with patients in chronic pain.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the 4 months, what did you discover? What transitioned for you? You had tried these other things for years. What did you finally learn is what you needed to heal from vaginismus?
I think part of the struggle was you just kind of silo off certain diagnoses or stuff like that. And so I had just assumed that my pelvic floor, because my knowledge at the time of my pelvic floor was just basic anatomy, neuroanatomy, and cadaver lab, basically musculoskeletal and stuff. And that was all done in graduate school. And then I moved on. And so my understanding of my pelvic anatomy was basic level, but I just kind of thought, oh, I was a gymnast my whole life. I am a runner. So I just have a tight pelvic floor and that's just the way I am. So it almost had been like I'd accepted this as this is my body. Sex is always and forever going to be painful for me. And I just need to keep kind of doing some stretches so it's not overly miserable. I also had an overactive bladder at the time and irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. So a lot of other things that would support, you just have a bad pelvic floor. So, and yeah, I do have a hypertonic pelvic floor, but the pain with sex issue I had to learn was a little bit of a different issue. And there's some link between all of this, that our pelvic floors are affected by how our nervous system is doing. If we have a dysregulated nervous system, if we're holding tension in our body, the pelvic floor is going to be annihilated by that in many women. And I was one of those. And I learned this with my other patients, that we need to do a lot of nervous system regulation to help with pain symptoms in our body, whether it's complex regional pain syndrome, fibromyalgia. We had different ways of the pain presenting, but I never really thought vaginismus was one of these. And it wasn't until I started putting the pieces together, it's like, okay, I'm thinking the pelvic floor itself is another, if you want to call it like a hot spot of what a nervous system dysregulation can manifest into. So my pelvic floor was taking a beating, where I kind of thought, I have a great regulated life. I don't have any of these chronic pain things. I just kind of thought the pelvic floor was a whole separate category. But once I invited that into the pain conversation was when I was like, okay, this is another one of our body's ways of kind of communicating to us, there's a problem. I need help. What can I do to now support my body better in this specific context of pelvic floor and sexual health?
That's so good. Of course, we can't have a whole therapy session, but like, what changed? How did you integrate your mind and body in the healing instead of just when you had focused on just body and then just mind?
So the fun thing about occupational therapists is that we are holistic in nature. We are whole body centric. And so, yes, we do musculoskeletal, we do joints, we do bones, we do all of that, but we also do cognition. We also do sensory processing. We also do nervous system work. We study the environment. We study the internal person. We study social interactions. And so we are multidimensional in so many ways. And our models of occupation take in all of these different factors into an occupation. And so when I put the occupational therapy frame like lens on this and took the occupation of sex, I then realized, okay, sex is way more complicated, way more complicated than just how is my vagina functioning. It's way more complicated than just like, what is my brain doing? Within the occupation of sex itself, there is every single domain possible. And then you dial up the tone to the nth degree. So everything within sex is heightened. Our emotional state is heightened. Our spiritual state is heightened. Our social state is heightened. Our body's muscular state is heightened. Nervous system, everything is at nth degree for each of these systems. So once I took the occupation of sex and sexual health and looked at it within myself, is when I realized I have been focusing only on one tiny element here, maybe two. And I have been throwing all my eggs at those individual things and siloing them. But when you look at how complicated this is, everything is intertwined and interconnected. So what I did was I put the layers all on top of each other and everything started integrating better. So it took a lot of brain power to realize, okay, how do I take the dilator and how do I integrate that in with the nervous system while integrating my partner and integrating in the pelvic floor? And putting all of those together into one system is when I started really seeing the results I needed. The foundation of that all was nervous system work, because that was what the connecting piece was between the dilator that exercises, the partner, the cognitive work, the emotional work. The nervous system needed to connect all of those. And so things started to come together. But it wasn't until I put my occupational therapy hat on for myself in the occupation of sex that all of this started coming together better.
That's amazing. So in your little plan for the 4 months, you worked on integrating the emotional, the partner, the pelvic floor, like how you're thinking all together to make it work in using dilators and working to have penetration. That is powerful, because it is. I think that is something that I've found in my work that is so fascinating, is we often separate sex from the rest of our life. Everything that we're doing in our lives, how we feel about our partner, how we feel about our marriage, how we feel about everything is leading into what's showing up in our body and being able to be present during sex. And that's so powerful. And I'm so glad, I'm not glad you had the experience, but I'm so glad that now you can take what you learned and share it, because it is so debilitating for women to feel like, I'm broken, I can't have intercourse. And you even said you got to a point where you didn't want any type of sexual interaction, any like stimulation of just the vulva or clitoris, because it was just so hard to feel connected. What would you tell women who are listening and they're like, okay, I am having painful intercourse. I don't know if I have vaginismus yet. Maybe I do. But what would you tell them to help them stay connected in their marriages with their partner through the journey of figuring out painful intercourse?
First off, I would say you are not broken by any means. This is a common thing that people experience. It's not normal. We want to get past the pain, but you're not broken and you're worthy of the investment of your sexual experience with your husband. It's so, so incredible to be able to get past that. It will take time, it will take effort, and it will take some intentionality to get there, but it's so worth it. And then the second thing I would say is probably the biggest thing I had to realize was my understanding of what was happening in the bedroom started outside the bedroom. Yes, I could on paper say, I want to have sex tonight. But then what would happen in the time building up to that was the fear and the anxiety about, okay, well, is it going to work this time? Or what do I need to do? Or am I going to be connected enough or whatever? And then it would end up being to where when we got to the bedroom, I was so discouraged in myself and my own inevitability of failure that I just kind of shut down. I went into shutdown mode. I didn't even connect. And so there was no opportunity for connection once we got to the bedroom because I had been in my head so much beforehand. But then also I had to realize my husband, as much as I love him and as intentional as he was at trying to love me, had become a sympathetic fight or flight trigger for me. And so if my husband would come up and give me a hug after he got home from work, I would immediately shoot up into a hyper aroused state, into fight or flight mode. And my body would just start tensing from that. And so it had gotten to the point where, and this was just from not just from physical hurting that had come from, but just the emotional toll that intimacy had been. Despite our best efforts, despite how much he loved me so tenderly in that, I had built up a wall against him and he had become a trigger in and of himself. That was a key thing for me to recognize. How can I get past vaginismus if my husband that I need to be with has become the biggest trigger for me? And so I had to do a lot of healing work there. So for the woman who's struggling right now with pain, vaginismus or not, recognizing that there's a lot happening here, to have grace with yourself. When you put it on the calendar, like, I'm going to do it tonight. We're going to be intimate and I'm going to get excited about it. But then you're, one, in your head all day long, and two, the very thing that your body is involuntarily fearing, in a sense, walks into the room, your body naturally is going to shoot up into a protective mode, not because he's done anything harmful or he has bad intentions, but just because it is the normal, typical thing that your body should do, is protect you. And he has become a source of emotional pain and physical pain, albeit none of that has been intentional.
Yeah.
So grace and compassion is the very first place you have to start, and just understanding that, then you can take the next step forward in healing.
What was some of your journey of healing to see your husband not as a trigger? First was the recognition, like, okay, when he touches me, I'm pushed up into fight or flight because my body's feeling like he's going to try to have intercourse, right? Like it jumped all the way to intercourse and you're like, oh, I have to protect myself. So how did you start to practice and work on not feeling like fight or flight whenever he wanted to be close to you?
It's hard. It's hard. There's a lot of awareness I had to do in this, because you jump into fight or flight and then immediately you start getting, I would at least get snappy and closed off and cold. And so I had to realize, why am I doing this right now? He just literally gave me a hug. Like you said, awareness is the number one thing. And then communication, being able to finally pinpoint that and communicate to my husband, here's what's happening. I don't mean to bite your head off. I don't mean to slither out of your arms in a way, but here is why I think this is happening. And then once we were able to kind of like communicate that a little bit better, and him to have a better understanding of where my body's coming from, then it's okay, well, what can we do? And so this is going to be different for every couple. I think for us, what I really needed was to kind of have an understanding and an expectation of what was happening. So it got to that point of where my husband said, like, hey, I would love to just give you a hug, just the hug right now. And I felt so safe. No expectation for even like a kiss, or this to be an extended hug, or for this to progress in my mind to the bedroom, and like, no, just a hug. Okay. And then I felt I could just almost like immediately just sink into that hug in full abandonment and relaxation. And it was so sweet. I still feel like warm and fuzzy, and the freeing of that moment to hug without tension and to hug without fear. And I say fear, and it's not, my husband we never had any kind of pain that was like, it was just all kind of coming internally from, I don't want this to happen. So that was a huge thing for us, was like pinpointing the communication, and for him to just be like, hey, I'm going to give you a hug, or, hey, I'd love to have a kiss. How do you feel about that? I'd be like, okay, well, let's kiss, but I just want to make sure, it's just going to be a kiss. And he's like, I assure you, it's just a kiss. And that was a really sweet thing. And we don't have pain anymore. We have a lot of fun and initiate, but still to this day, it's just like such a comforting thing. So, we still do that. Such a sweet way to communicate. Like, I see you, I love you, and I'm letting you know this is where I'm coming from.
That is powerful.
I say every couple will be different for. So
Yeah.
for some couples, that's not going to work. And so when I work with my clients, we're trying to figure out like, what kind of communication do you need? What does your body need? How can we get you to that safe place and feel supported in that for what it looks best for you and your relationship? Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's always going to be the answer.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful idea though, because for a lot of women, even women who don't have painful intercourse, there's this wondering like, oh, when my husband touches me, is he wanting more? And I think that's so powerful to lean into talking about like, hey, I would just like a hug, or hey, we're not having sex today. So whatever touch we have is just to lean into and have hugs and kisses, and it's not leading to the bedroom. And I think that's so powerful to think about. As we're kind of closing up, Jess, I would just love for you to express some of your feelings on your journey. Was it worth it? Was it worth it to heal? Because you were at a point where you're like, I am fine to never have sex again. Was it worth it for women who are feeling the same and like, I'm fine never to have sex again? What would you tell them? Was it worth it, and why?
I tell my clients this often, but yes, it is so worth it. God created intimacy to be the most intense connection and pleasure within marriage. It is the playground of marriage. You experience these feelings, these emotions nowhere else. And it's so beautiful. And I'd never seen it as really a true gift. I kind of thought it almost was a curse in my marriage in all this sense. But to now have tasted and seen how good, how beautiful, and how sweet it is such a gift, and it is so worth fighting for. And I promise you're worth it. You're worth the investment. It took me 8 years to get past this, but I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back and make it any shorter, because in those 8 years, it healed our marriage in so many ways. It deepened our communication. It deepened our enjoyment now of intimacy, had us dive into things that we probably never would have dived into had we not experienced this level of pain and frustration. So yeah, looking back, 8 years is a long time, but I wouldn't have made it any shorter. I would tell Jess back on her wedding night, hey, just lean into God during this time and trust the process, because it's going to be so healing. And now I'm grateful because I had consult calls, thousands, it seems like, around the world. And every woman I get to talk to, for the most part, I can connect with some part of her story, because within 8 years, you experience a lot of different things. So now I'm really grateful for that experience, that I can really help and touch clients' lives too.
That is so powerful. And I think it's really cool to think about your journey of 8 years compared to 4 months, too. That when you can get the right pieces that you need for healing, it doesn't have to be this like painstaking 10-year process. Like you can start seeing a lot of growth probably almost immediately when you start bringing in the pieces. Would you agree with that? That it's like, you're starting to see growth, not that you've reached the end goal, but like you're starting to see growth immediately versus like nothing's happening.
Right. In bigger ways than you think too. Because I mean, I always like to say, I'm not just interested in, can we get a penis in you without pain? Like my whole goal is like, can we transform your whole understanding and view of intimacy?
Yeah.
So maybe, yes, dilators and all of the nuances with that are still a little bit of a struggle, but I guarantee you, your communication with your husband and your understanding of your body and your nervous system and how to show up for yourself is deepened. And as that continues to shift and grow, dilators and all of that stuff will follow behind it too. So they both go together, but healing is such a complicatedly beautiful process that's way bigger than just does something go inside your vagina without pain.
Yes, it's so true. And that's a lot of the work I do too, is like, let's have the whole self and bring it in, because it's so much more than just this act of penis and vagina. It's your whole life showing up with this person. And that's so cool. Could you just share some end thoughts? What do you wish women understood about painful sex, and where would you tell them to start?
Oh, I wish that women would know that sex is not supposed to be painful. We have this
Woohoo!
little like lie amongst us that it's going to be painful, and it's
Yep.
not supposed to be that way. And because people told me it was going to be painful, it was painful, and it stayed
Yep.
painful for so long. Stop telling each other it's painful. And then if you are experiencing pain, you do not need to sit in that. Like like I said, you are worthy of investing in getting past that, investing the time, the resources, the emotional, whatever it takes. Like it is so good to get past that. And so I just would encourage whoever's listening who's experiencing pain to move beyond that, do what you need to do to fight that and to heal in that way.
Where would you have them start to get help?
That's complicated. I would say go to a gynecologist and see if you can get answers, because there's a lot of different reasons why we can have pain with sex. And so it's always good to get checked out. I understand that for some women, that's a barrier in a lot of ways. And so you're welcome to message me and just kind of chat with me if you'd like. But pelvic floor therapy is always a really great option too, to have someone kind of look at you in person. That is limiting because it is a lot of times mostly a biomechanical approach. So for a lot of sexual healing, we need to have more of that comprehensive approach. But starting with a gynecologist and getting a general, hey, let's take a look at what's going on, is probably the best place to start.
And if your gynecologist says you're fine, drink a glass of wine, find a new one.
Come find me.
Right?
I'll
Go find Jess and be like, no. And where can people find you, Jess, and more of your resources?
You can find me at painfreeintimacy.com. I've got a bunch of free resources there. I'm on Instagram at painfree.intimacy. I have a Facebook group for those who are looking for more resources on vaginismus. I have tons of video trainings and guides and stuff within the Facebook group. But yeah, so you can find me. I'm on all the socials.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was beautiful to hear your story.
Thank you so much for making space for this and for communicating that pain with sex is not okay.
Amen. We're going to preach it forever. Thanks, Jess. I hope that you loved Jess as much as I do. Her story is so inspiring. Even though this was such a long process for her, that she didn't give up, that she worked to find a solution for her painful intercourse that she was experiencing, and being able to transform her relationship through this journey to make sex a beautiful part of her marriage, the way that God intended it to be. So much of what we're taught in broader society and movies we watch and the books we read is inaccurate and often really unhelpful in making it so that we can actually access the type of deep connection and fulfilling love that God actually wanted us to access through marital intimacy and through sex in our marriage. And I hope that Jess gave you hope. If you're experiencing vaginismus, if you're wondering if you're experiencing vaginismus, to know that there is help out there, that you can learn to create a loving and beautiful sexual relationship with your husband, even if it started out with painful intercourse. We're here for you. I'm cheering you on, and you can work with your husband to make sex something that is deeply connecting, beautiful, and life-giving for your marriage. As always, thanks for talking love. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Kimberly Demers, and our miscellaneous task whiz, Melissa Havertz.